11 lawyers failed, but a humble janitor found the solution in just 2 minutes. And what the millionaire CEO did next surprised everyone. Before we get into the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Lina Morales was called in quickly to clean the floor of the meeting room, where one of the stressed-out lawyers had spilled a glass of water during the chaos. She walked in pushing her cleaning cart, wearing a faded Garfield t-shirt that made it clear she hadn't planned to be there at that hour. As she knelt to clean the small puddle in the corner, barely visible, chaos was erupting above her head. Damian Hayes, the sharp and serious CEO of Hayes & Lee, had his fingers pressed to his forehead, eyes narrowed. 11 lawyers were all talking at once, blaming each other, quoting legal cases, contradicting one another under pressure. The mood was tense. Everything centered around Clause 38B in the contract with the Renshaw Group. If they couldn't find a legal loophole, the company wouldn't just lose millions, it would lose the market's trust. And to Damian, that was even more valuable. "This is a legal bomb," one lawyer said. "The clause is locked, there's no way around it." Damian sighed, frustrated. "And to think you studied at Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, just to come here with nothing." Lina moved quietly through the back of the room, mop gliding gracefully, eyes pretending not to notice. But when she looked up at the whiteboard with the clause written out and notes scribbled around it, she said casually, "That doesn't look like a locked clause. Looks more like a structure issue." It was written backwards from the logic in Article 127 of the Federal Contract Code. The silence hit like someone had unplugged the room. 11 heads slowly turned. Damian, too. His gray eyes landed on the young woman in faded jeans, now adjusting her bucket. "How do you know that?" he asked, his tone dry. Lina turned to him without lowering her gaze. "Because I read it. It's in one of the books I have at home." "What kind of book?" "Civil and contract law. I have a whole set. A professor who used to live in my neighborhood gave them to me. I read one chapter a night after my son goes to bed." One lawyer gave a mocking cough. Another, clearly annoyed, said, "With all due respect, this is a professional setting." Lina smiled. "And what I said, was it wrong? Because if it's just about the uniform, I can wear a suit tomorrow. I accidentally bought one thinking it was a sweatshirt." Damian looked at Lina like she was a code he couldn't crack. "Did you study law?" 3 years. I was 1 year away from graduating, but life got in the way. Working became more urgent than studying, but I never stopped reading. Just didn't get the degree." He stood up slowly, walked past the other lawyers like no one else in the room existed but her. He stopped a few feet away. "Repeat what you said, in detail." Lina put the mop down and crossed her arms. Clause 38B was written with a structure that depends on the conditional paragraph in Section 14, but it goes against Article 127 of the Federal Code. That opens a door for it to be voided due to interpretive ambiguity, especially if you argue it based on the precedent Garvin v. Dakota Energy, 2019. Another silence. This time, no one coughed. Damian kept his eyes on her. For the first time in years, his face showed no judgment. It was like he was seeing something that didn't fit into the neat spreadsheets he was used to. "You read the Garvin v. Dakota case?" Twice. The defense's argument was brilliant, but I would have ended it with a different quote. I thought the final one was weak. One of the lawyers tried to interrupt. "This can't be right. The analysis was done by experts. Maybe she's just confusing some terms." Lina shrugged. "Then read it again carefully at home. It's on page 197 of Volume 2 from Professor Marchesi's series. It's a good read after dinner." Damian crossed his arms. His face showed a mix of disbelief and curiosity. For the first time all morning, he didn't look bored. He looked intrigued. "What's your name?" "Lina Morales." "Miss Lina Morales, let's talk in my office." She blinked. "But the floor's still wet." "Let the lawyers step around it," he said, turning to them. "Or is that too much to ask?" The meeting ended in silence. Lina, not quite sure if this was a punishment or a promotion, pushed her cleaning cart into the hallway with a crooked smile. Damian's office was quiet, as if even the furniture knew there was no room for unnecessary noise there. Lina came in pushing the cleaning cart but left it outside. Not because anyone told her to, but because she knew that wasn't what he wanted from her at that moment. Damien stood by the desk, holding a tablet. The screen showed a long clause full of tricky commas and bureaucratic terms. He didn't say anything right away. He just gestured for her to sit. Lena looked at the elegant chair like it was a throne from a movie. She sat slowly, adjusting her Garfield t-shirt, which looked even more out of place than a cat in court. "This clause here," Damien said at last, "was used as a model in a merger contract between two energy companies in Florida. One of our lawyers thinks it might be useful. What do you think?" Lena quickly read the first few paragraphs on the screen. Her eyes moved naturally over the words. When she finished, she leaned back and spoke calmly. "It works, if the goal is to confuse whoever reads it. This clause is nice, full of technical terms, but it hides the main point behind 5 subjunctives and 2 ambiguities. It's a trap, and not even a good one." Damien raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Well, the phrase transfer of contractual responsibility comes before the conditional clause, which directly conflicts with Article 211 of the Civil Code. If a careful judge reads it, they'll see it as intentional omission." "You memorize articles?" "No, I understand the reasoning behind them. The number is just the address. The content is what matters." Damien looked at the woman in front of him like he was seeing a chess piece that hadn't been on the board before, and suddenly realized it was the most dangerous one in the game. "And this one?" He slid the tablet, opening a new document. "Asset Protection Clause in case of unilateral termination." Lena read for a few seconds and shook her head. "That's been thrown out of court at least 3 times. There's a recent case, Rowan versus Palms Trading, 2021. The side that included this clause lost because it violated the principle of good faith in contracts. The judge was clear. You can't protect assets by hiding risks in legal fine print." Damien leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. "And what if I told you 3 of my experienced lawyers approved this wording? I'd say they should read more books and fewer canned contracts." The silence in the office was broken only by the sounds of the city outside. Damien, for the first time in years, seemed unguarded, not from weakness, but from a different kind of surprise, admiration. "How do you remember so many cases?" he asked, more curious than critical. "I read everything out loud. My 6-year-old can already say jurisprudence, even though he thinks it's a cartoon character's name." Damien laughed, really laughed. It was quick, restrained, but real. "You're unexpected. I tend to have that effect, especially on deep cleaning days." He walked over to the desk and picked up a blue folder, placing it in front of her. "This is the contract we're trying to protect. If Renshaw manages to invalidate Clause 38B, they'll have an opening to void the entire agreement. That would be disastrous." Lena opened the folder and studied the pages. "You forgot to use a generic safeguard in the contract's closing section. A cautious lawyer would have added that automatically. But sometimes geniuses forget the obvious." Damien frowned. "Are you saying our lawyers are careless?" "I'm saying sometimes vanity takes the place of caution. And when that happens, the contract ends up with too much ego and not enough precaution." He looked at her, not with his usual sternness. It was almost like he was trying to figure out where all this was coming from. "You studied law but didn't finish." 3.5 years. I left because I had to choose between a diploma and milk in the fridge. My ex said he wasn't ready to be a father. But the baby came anyway. And books don't cry at night, you know? So I studied when I could, and worked when I had to." Damien nodded, without judgment, just taking it in. "You know you can't act as a lawyer. That's illegal." "I know. I'm not going to sign anything or show up anywhere. But I can think, observe, suggest. That's still allowed." He turned his back to her and looked out the window. The city lights seemed less bright than the mind he had just discovered in his own company. "I need you," he said, still looking out. "But no one can know." Lena crossed her legs, relaxed. "Like a secret agent?" "More like a strategic ally. If anyone finds out I'm taking legal advice from a cleaning staff member, this will turn into a soap opera and an institutional crisis." "So I'll be your cleaner of confidential clauses then." He turned to her. "You in?" She stood up, picked up the bucket, and replied with a slight smile, "As long as I don't have to wear high heels. My uniform says it all." Lena started her new role wearing the same worn-out sneakers as always. The only difference was that now, along with the bucket and rag, she carried a hard-covered notebook where she jotted down lawyers' names, words that sounded complicated, and ideas that came to her while scrubbing floors. Damien had been clear. No one needed to know what she was really doing. Officially, she was still the cleaner for the administrative wing. But in reality, she was much more than that. She was the company's invisible tie, the sharp mind behind a few decisions that even the lawyers couldn't handle on their own. It all started the following Tuesday, when Damien quietly asked her to review an email meant for an outside consulting firm. The content was technical, but vague. Lena read it, scratched her chin, and said, "Mind if I tweak it a little?" Damien shrugged. She sat down, typed quickly, and when she finished, handed the laptop back. The new paragraph read, "Based on the interpretive safeguard clause in the contract signed by both parties and backed by Federal Law Article 64C, we believe the proposed contract revision lacks sufficient basis and, therefore, is not advisable. Sincerely, P.S. If you disagree, we're happy to discuss it over coffee. Just bring cookies." Damien raised an eyebrow. "Cookies?" Technical term to lighten the mood. They'll laugh, but they'll also know you're serious. He didn't say a word, just clicked send. Before long, Lena started receiving quiet little requests. One lawyer would leave a post-it on the door asking, "Does the cross-compensation clause apply to services?" She'd leave a folded note by the coffee machine, "Only if it's clearly stated, and even then, watch out for Article 92B. No one knew who was behind the sharp replies. But suddenly, the mistakes started to shrink. Damien's meetings became shorter and more effective. And the toughest questions stopped being asked out loud in the hallways. Instead, they started being whispered during coffee breaks. On the third day, Lena sat quietly in the break room writing in her notebook when she overheard two lawyers talking. Hayes is acting different, more direct, more precise, and the weird part, without our help. Maybe he hired an outside consultant, or maybe a legal crystal ball. Lena smiled. So far, no one suspected her. But that wouldn't last long. The conflict came one Friday morning when Alexander Rios, young, pompous, and with an ego big enough to need its own ID badge, walked into the back office and caught Lena replying to an email on Damien's computer. "What are you doing there?" She looked at him calmly. "Replying to a legal email. About a merger and a reversibility clause. Want to take a look?" He stormed over, outraged. "This is a clear violation of procedure. You're not even supposed to use this system. You're just a cleaning lady." Lena took a deep breath. There was no anger in her stance, just the steady posture of someone who refuses to be belittled. Anyone can read the law, but to understand its soul is a privilege for those who study beyond the page, she said, looking him straight in the eye. Alexander frowned. "That's not in the code." "No, it's not. It's from the preface of Professor Marchese's book. The same professor who teaches your graduate classes. I took it from his book." The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. From that day on, Lena was informally called the voice in the footnotes. No one knew exactly who she was, but the rumors began to spread. And the fact that Damien kept consulting her, without saying why, only added to the mystery. One afternoon, a sensitive document landed on Damien's desk. It was a letter threatening litigation, written in an aggressive and intimidating tone. He walked into his office and, without calling anyone, handed the letter to Lena. She read it, thought for 2 minutes, and wrote a short reply. Direct, clear, and just the right touch of irony. "We appreciate your concern regarding the potential legal outcomes of this contract. However, we believe there's no reason for legal theatrics or imaginary contractual ghosts. Our team, visible or not, is ready for any move, with respect and without fear." Damien read it and smiled, for the first time in public. That same week, during a break, Lena walked past the meeting room where 2 interns were debating whether or not to activate a joint liability clause in a partnership agreement. "It depends on how the bond was formed," Lena said, still walking. The 2 men looked at each other. "What do you mean?" She turned back with a smile. "If the joint responsibility was set by agreement, then yes. But if it's assumed just by interpretation, you risk canceling the original intent. It's in Article 265. Good luck, gentlemen." And she walked away like she had only made a comment about the weather. Watching everything from his office, Damien did something unusual. He wrote her name down in a notebook he never used. It was like he wanted to remind himself that intelligence sometimes shows up in a faded t-shirt and an old backpack. It was almost 10 at night when Lena finished organizing the last few documents on Damien's desk. The office was quiet and dimly lit, with only the desk lamp casting a warm circle of light over the scattered papers. Outside, Chicago glowed through the large windows, but inside that room, the world had narrowed down to just two people and a conversation that hadn't started yet. Damien leaned back in his chair, watching Lena carefully fold a sheet of paper where she had written her notes about the Renshaw case. He noticed she always folded papers the same way, twice, into neat rectangles, as if each one were a letter that deserved respect. "You don't have to stay this late," he finally said, breaking the silence. "I know, but I like the office when it's empty. It's easier to think when no one's looking at me like I'm some kind of circus act." Lena put the last book into her bag and sat in the chair across from him. It wasn't the elegant armchair she used during formal meetings. It was a simple wooden chair, making her feel more present, more real. "Can I ask you something?" Damien said, leaning forward. "Sure, but if it's about case law, I charge extra after 9. He smiled, but his expression quickly turned serious. "Why did you study law? I mean, what made you choose that field?" Lena took a deep breath, like she was opening a drawer she hadn't looked inside in a long time. "My father was a construction worker. He died when I was 16 in a work accident. The company he worked for tried not to pay compensation to my mom. They said he wasn't wearing safety equipment, that it was his fault. A complete lie." She paused, looking down at her hands. "My mom didn't know how to fight back. We couldn't afford a lawyer, and the few who agreed to talk to us acted like they were doing us a favor, like we should be grateful just for being heard." Damien leaned in, listening closely. "And then I thought, if I knew the law, if I understood how things worked, maybe I could help her. Maybe I could help other people in the same situation. So I enrolled in college with a scholarship." "Did you win the case?" "We did. After 2 years of fighting, my mom used the money to open a small dressmaking shop in our neighborhood. It's still there. She sews party dresses for girls who want to feel like princesses." Lena smiled, though there was a soft sadness in it. "You must have been an excellent student," Damien said. "I was. Good grades, part of study groups, loved discussing cases with the professors. I had a plan. Finish my degree, go to grad school, maybe one day open a legal aid office in my neighborhood." "What happened?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Lena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture Damien had already noticed she did when she was collecting her thoughts. "Diego," she said finally. "I met him in my second year. He was studying business, a year ahead of me. Nice smile, easy to talk to, dreams that seemed to match mine. Or so I thought." Damien noticed his own breathing had become more focused. "We dated for a year and a half. I was in my 3rd year when I found out I was pregnant. It was unexpected, but when I told him, I thought we'd face it together. But that's not what happened. He panicked, said he was too young to be a father, that he still had too many plans, and maybe it would be better to take care of the situation another way." Lena paused, looking out the window. "I told him I respected his decision not to be a father, but that I was going to have the baby, and he didn't need to worry because I'd manage on my own." "And did you?" "I had to. I dropped out in the middle of my 3rd year. The scholarship didn't cover daycare, and my mom was already busy with the shop, so she couldn't take care of Miguel all the time. I needed to work." Damien felt something stir in his chest, a mix of admiration and frustration he couldn't quite name. "And Diego?" "She disappeared. Literally. Moved to another city after graduation. I never saw him again. Miguel used to ask about his father when he was little, but he doesn't anymore. I think he understands we're a complete family just the way we are." "And you never thought about going back to college?" Lena gave a quiet laugh. "I did. I thought about it every night when I'd put Miguel to bed and open the books I managed to borrow or buy secondhand at fairs. But then I realized something. I never stopped studying. I just changed the way I did it." She got up and went to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I started going to the neighborhood library. They had a small legal section, but it was complete. Professor Marchesi, the same one I mentioned to Alexander, used to give extra lessons there on Saturdays. When he heard my story, he started lending me books. Lending you books? At first, yes. Then, when he saw I really studied them, took notes, understood what I read, he started giving me the books. He said books are meant to be read, not just sit on a shelf for decoration. Damien got up too, walking over to stand beside her at the window. And you never felt angry about having to give up your plans? Lena turned to him, and for the first time that night, her eyes shone with a different kind of intensity. I did, for a long time. Angry at Diego, at the situation, at myself for falling in love with someone who wasn't ready to build anything serious. But after Miguel was born, she paused, as if she were reliving the moment. When he was born, and I held him for the first time, I understood my plans hadn't been destroyed. They just changed shape. I wouldn't be the lawyer I dreamed of being at 18, but I would be the mother I wanted to be at 20. And now? Do you regret it? Having Miguel? Never. He's the best part of me. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about being afraid and moving forward anyway. Damien watched her profile against the city lights. There was something in Lena he'd never seen before, a kind of strength that didn't come from trying to prove anything to anyone, but from knowing exactly who she was. And you still study? Every night. After he falls asleep, I open my books. I read cases, study legal precedents, follow changes in the law. Not because I have to, because I want to, because it makes sense to me. Even knowing you can't practice? Practicing law is one thing, understanding it is another. And who knows, maybe one day I'll go back to college. Miguel is growing up, becoming more independent. Maybe it'll be time to finish what I started. Damien felt a strange emotion rise in his chest. It was admiration, yes, but more than that. It was like he was standing in front of someone who had turned every obstacle into a step, every fall into a push to climb higher. "You're remarkable," he said, the word coming out with more feeling than he intended. "I'm a single mother who cleans offices and reads legal books in her spare time. Nothing too remarkable about that." "You're wrong. You took a situation that could have destroyed you and turned it into strength. You raised a child on your own, never stopped learning, never lost your kindness or your sense of humor. And on top of that, you solve problems that lawyers with doctorates can't figure out." Lena smiled, but there was a moist shine in her eyes. "Miguel asked me the other day if I was sad about not becoming a lawyer. Do you know what I told him?" "What?" "I told him maybe I didn't become the lawyer I dreamed of being, but I became the person I needed to be. And that was worth even more." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Damien watched Lena smooth her hair, pick up her bag, returning to her efficient employee mode. But something had changed in those minutes. An intimacy had formed, a mutual understanding that went beyond professional partnership. "I need to go," she said. "Miguel goes to bed early, but he likes me to be there when he wakes up in the middle of the night. Sometimes he has nightmares." "Of course. Thank you for sharing that with me." "Thank you for listening." She walked to the door but turned before leaving. "And Damien, this conversation stays between us, all right? Not because it's a secret, but because it's personal." "Of course." He left. Damien was alone in the office, looking at the chair where she'd been sitting. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not in a diminished way, but in a humble one. Like he'd just met someone who made him question everything he thought he knew about strength, determination, and worth. The next day, Damien arrived at the office earlier than usual. Not because he had urgent meetings or documents to review, but because he wanted to observe. He wanted to better understand the woman who had changed his view of intelligence and character in a single conversation. He positioned himself strategically in the break room, where he could see the main hallway. At 8:15, Lena walked in with her blue uniform and her old backpack. But Damien saw her differently now. Every move she made seemed to tell a story. Every smile she gave to coworkers showed a kindness that went beyond just being polite. He watched as she stopped to help an intern who had dropped a stack of papers. Instead of just helping to pick them up, she organized them by date and handed them back with a joke about how papers have a life of their own in law offices. The young man laughed and thanked her, clearly relieved. Later, During a meeting with the legal team, Damien caught himself wondering what Lena would say about each point being made. When one of the lawyers suggested a strategy he knew was weak, he almost murmured, "Lena would say that has a loophole in Clause 3, but held back." At lunchtime, he saw her sitting alone in the courtyard, eating a sandwich and reading a book on constitutional law. It didn't feel like a performance. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was real interest, genuine passion for learning. Damien realized he was feeling something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the kind of physical attraction he'd felt for other women. It wasn't just the professional respect he had for competent colleagues. It was deeper, more complex. It was admiration mixed with curiosity, respect blended with an urge to know more, to understand how such a brilliant mind had developed in such challenging circumstances. He was fascinated by how she turned difficulty into insight, obstacles into chances to grow. By the end of the day, when the office began to empty out, Damien asked Lena to join him for a conversation. "I have something for you," he said, handing her an envelope. Lena opened it and found a check. A significant amount, enough to cover several months of expenses. "What's this?" "A bonus, for all the help you've given me, for solutions none of my lawyers could come up with." Lena looked at the check for a few seconds, then handed it back. "I can't accept this." "Why not? You deserve it. The value you bring to my work is worth far more than this." "Exactly why I can't accept it." Damien frowned, puzzled. "I don't understand." Lena sat in the same chair she'd used the night before. "If I accept this check, you'll feel like we're even, like you paid for my knowledge, for my help, and I'll feel like someone who got compensated for being useful. But that's exactly what I'm doing, compensating someone who's been helpful. No, Damien, I'm not a favor. I'm value." The words hung in the air, filled with dignity and resolve. "You don't get it," she went on. "I don't help you because I need money. I help you because I enjoy it, because it makes sense to me, because I finally get to use everything I've learned. Money would turn this into a transaction. But what we have here is a partnership." Damien put the check away, feeling both turned down and deeply impressed. "Then how can I give back?" "Keep letting me be involved. Keep trusting my judgment, and maybe, just maybe, see me as a person. Not just a cleaning lady who happens to know the law." At that moment, Damien realized what he was feeling. He was falling in love. Not with Lena's looks, not with how useful she was at work, but with her essence, her integrity, her mind, her ability to turn any situation into a chance to grow. And that scared him more than any lawsuit he had ever faced. Thursday morning began like any other at Hayes & Lee. Lena arrived right at 8, greeted the front desk staff, and made her way to the administrative floor with her cleaning cart. What she didn't know was that just a few feet away, Marcus Thompson, a second-year intern and part-time aspiring influencer, was discreetly recording a video for his TikTok channel. Marcus had been curious about the buzz around the office, rumors of a mysterious, invisible consultant who had been helping Damien Hayes with complex cases. When he saw Lena patiently explaining to two other interns the difference between a termination clause and a cancellation clause, he decided it was perfect content for his social media. "Look, it's simple," Lena said, leaning on a broom as she gestured. "A termination clause is like a breakup where you just can't agree on movies anymore. It's over, but no one did anything wrong. Now, a rescission clause? That's when one person was secretly eating all the popcorn. That's a breach of trust." The interns laughed, and one of them asked, "What if someone lied about liking horror movies just to impress the other?" "Well, my friend, that's misrepresentation. The whole agreement was based on false information. That can make the contract invalid from the beginning. Like when you find out your crush doesn't even like dogs or pizza. That's a fundamental mismatch. Relationship voided." Marcus kept recording, fascinated by how Lena explained concepts that his professors took hours to make half as clear. "And how do we know which one to use in each case?" another intern asked. "Main question, was there bad faith? If yes, it's rescission. If not, it's just termination. It's like breaking up over text or in person. Either way, it's over, but one's a little more respectful than the other." Lena grabbed the rag and got ready to head back to work, but one of the guys still had a question. What if both people want out of the contract, but for different reasons? Then you've got a mutual divorce with a fight over who keeps the dog. Bilateral termination with a specific division clause. Everyone takes what they brought in, but you've got to decide who keeps the shared Netflix account. The three of them burst out laughing, and Marcus ended the recording with a close-up on Lena's face as she gave a relaxed wave to the camera. Folks, you've just watched the best contract law class in history, taught by the most unlikely expert at the fanciest law firm in Chicago. Now this is what access to knowledge looks like. Marcus posted the video on TikTok at 2 p.m. with the caption, POV, the janitor at your office explains contract law better than your Harvard professor, simple law-ish wisdom without diplomas, legal legend. What happened next even surprised Marcus. Within 2 hours, the video had 50,000 views. After 4, it hit 200,000. By the end of the day, it had passed 500,000, filled with excited comments from law students, lawyers, and professors alike. This woman explained in 2 minutes what my professor couldn't explain in a whole semester. Does anyone know where she teaches? I'm dropping out of college to study with her. Finally, someone who makes law makes sense. Wait, she's a janitor? How is she better than a Harvard PhD? The video was shared in WhatsApp groups at law schools across the country. It went viral on Twitter under the hashtag JanitorJD, and Instagram lit up with stories quoting Lena's explanations. The legal news site Legal News shared the clip with the headline, Cleaning Staff Member Teaches Contract Law, goes viral on social media. Another outlet, Law for All, ran a full article, The Accidental Educator Who's Changing How We Talk About the Law. But the real explosion happened when the popular page Legal Memes posted an image of Lena holding her broom next to 11 solemn lawyers in robes, with the caption, The Janitor Who Outsmarted 11 Doctors of Law. The meme took off like wildfire. Dozens of versions followed. When the janitor knows more than your lawyer. Plot twist. The smartest person in the office doesn't have a degree. She cleans the floors and your legal arguments. The next morning, Lena arrived at work with no idea what had happened. She was greeted with curious stares, whispered conversations, and a few knowing smiles. She only realized something was up when the receptionist, barely containing her excitement, showed her a phone. Lena, you've gone viral. Over 2 million views. Lena watched the video with an amused look, shaking her head. That Marcus? I always thought he recorded too much. You're not mad. Why would I be? Did I say anything wrong? No, but you didn't ask to be filmed. That's true, but I didn't say anything classified either, and from the comments I'm seeing, people are learning. That's a good thing. When Damien arrived at the office an hour later, there were already 3 calls from journalists waiting, 2 emails from TV producers wanting to interview the viral janitor, and a message from Human Resources asking how to handle the situation. Damien called Marcus in right away. You had no right to film an employee without permission. Mr. Hayes, I didn't know it was going to go viral like that. It was just a silly video for my followers. Take the video down. Now. But sir, it's already been shared thousands of times. Even if I delete it, it won't make much difference. And, well, technically I recorded it in a public area of the office, and she didn't say anything about not wanting to be filmed. Damien took a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. He wasn't angry about Lena's success, but worried about the possible consequences. The firm could be questioned about its hiring practices, about why a cleaning staff member had such advanced legal knowledge, about the overall competence of the legal team. He called Lena in for a private talk. Lena, we need to talk about this situation. The video? I saw it. It's funny. Do you understand the implications? The press might want to talk to you, dig into your story, ask why you're not practicing law. And I'll answer with the truth. That I studied law, didn't finish because of personal reasons, but kept studying because I enjoy it. What's the problem? The problem is this could create an awkward situation for the firm. People will question our competence, ask why we rely on a cleaning staff member to solve complex cases. Lena crossed her arms, taking on a more serious tone. Damien, are you embarrassed by me? The question caught him off guard. That's not it. Then what is it? Did I share any confidential information? Break any protocol? Disrespect a client? No, but then let me ask you something. Would you rather have a team that pretends to know everything or someone who really understands the subject, no matter their job title? Damien was silent for a few seconds. You're right. I'm sorry. It's just, this kind of attention could complicate our partnership. Our partnership has always been complicated, Damien, since day one, and it still worked. She stood and walked to the window. You know what I think about that video? If people laugh at me, I hope they learn something in the process. How many law students do you think understood concepts that were stuck in their heads just because I used analogies with relationships and Netflix? Probably a lot. Then the video served a purpose, and if it causes any problems for the firm, we'll deal with them. But I'm not going to hide just because people found out intelligence doesn't come with a diploma. Damien watched her, once again impressed by her ability to turn a potentially messy situation into an opportunity for reflection. You're not afraid of being judged? Damien, I'm a single mother, a cleaner, who studies law in her breaks. If I were afraid of judgment, I wouldn't even leave the house. What matters to me is, am I doing something useful? Am I helping someone? Am I being true to myself? And are you? I am. So let the memes come, the interviews, the questions. I'll answer everything as naturally as I explain contract clauses. That afternoon, when 3 more news outlets reached out wanting to interview the cleaner who became a phenomenon, Damien didn't try to block them. Instead, he asked Lena if she needed anything. Just promise me one thing, she said. What? If any journalist asks about my boss, tell them he's the smartest person I know, because it's true, and because intelligence recognizes intelligence. It was official. Damien was completely in love. The case Renshaw versus Hayes and Lee was scheduled for Monday at 9 in the morning in the Chicago Superior Court. It was the kind of trial that would determine not only the firm's financial future, but also its reputation in the market. $60 million at stake, plus the credibility Damien had built over 15 years of work. On the Friday before, the tension in the office was palpable. The lawyers reviewed arguments, checked precedents, and exchanged nervous looks in the hallways. Everyone knew the defense strategy hinged on a complex interpretation of Clause 38B, the very clause Lena had flagged as problematic weeks before. Damien was in his office, surrounded by stacks of documents and 3 senior attorneys who looked more anxious than confident. The argument is solid, said Robert Chen, the most experienced on the team. But the prosecution will go after our interpretation of the safeguard clause. And if they cite the Morrison versus Atlantic precedent, asked Sarah, second in command, our defense will be weakened. Damien rubbed his temples. He had studied the case for weeks, but something still bothered him. There was a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. That was when Lena knocked on the door. Excuse me, can I come in? Of course. She was carrying a tray with coffee and a folder under her arm. I brought you some coffee, and, well, I heard you talking about Morrison versus Atlantic. Robert raised an eyebrow. And? You're worried about the wrong precedent. The room fell silent. Lena placed the tray on the table and opened her folder. The Morrison versus Atlantic ruling was partially overturned 6 months later by Hamilton versus Shore Industries. The interpretation you're worried about is no longer valid. Sarah quickly flipped through her documents. That's not in our research. That's because it was published in a lesser-known journal, not the major law reviews. But it completely changed the legal precedent. What you should be watching out for is Nelson versus Phoenix Corp. From 2 months ago. Damien leaned forward. Explain. The Nelson case introduced a new way of interpreting ambiguous clauses in merger contracts. If the prosecution cites that case, then yes, you've got a problem. But you also have a solution. She pulled up a chair and sat down between them, spreading papers across the table. In Nelson, the judge used a strictly literal reading of the law, ignoring the historical context. But there's an older case, Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steele, from 1987, that perfectly fits our situation. Over the next 2 hours, Lena completely restructured the defense strategy. She didn't just point out weaknesses in their original arguments. She built a solid new approach, based on precedents the other lawyers weren't even aware of. You should be the one in court on Monday, Robert said, clearly impressed. I can't, and I won't. Why not? Because that's not where I belong. I belong here, helping you get ready. Damien's gonna shine in that courtroom, and you'll all see why he's one of the best attorneys in Chicago. On Sunday night, Damien called Lena. I'm nervous. Nervous or insecure? What's the difference? Nervous means you know you're prepared, but your heart's still racing. Insecure means you're not sure you're up to it. Then I'm nervous. Good. That means you care about the outcome. Now tell me, what's the central point of our argument? For 40 minutes, Lena had him go over the key points again, tested his responses to possible questions, and reminded him of the crucial precedents. By the time they hung up, Damien felt confident for the first time in weeks. On Monday morning, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, law students, and curious spectators, all drawn in by the attention surrounding the viral janitor case, filled every available seat. Lena sat quietly at the back, wearing a simple blouse and jeans. Damien started strong. His opening argument was clear, persuasive, and well-structured. He cited the precedents Lena had recommended and laid out a solid line of reasoning. For 40 minutes, he completely owned the courtroom. But then the prosecution struck back. Your Honor, said the prosecutor, a well-dressed woman in her 50s, the defense relies on a questionable interpretation of Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steele. I'd like to point out that this precedent was partially modified by the recent ruling in Torres versus Infinity Holdings. Damien felt the blood drain from his face. Torres versus Infinity Holdings. He didn't know that case. It hadn't come up in his research. Lena hadn't mentioned it. The change introduced by Torres versus Infinity, the prosecutor continued, clearly states that in merger contracts with ambiguous clauses, the interpretation must favor the party that did not draft the original document. The judge leaned in, clearly interested. Damien knew he had to respond, but he had no idea how to counter a precedent he'd never seen before. His team looked just as lost. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, would you like to respond to the precedent raised by the prosecution? Damien stood up, but his mind was blank. He looked through his papers, searching for anything he could use, but found nothing. Then he heard a soft voice behind him. Article 127, paragraph 3. Partial, not full, modification. It was Lena. She had stood up and, speaking just loud enough for him to hear, gave him exactly what he needed. Damien took a deep breath and turned to the judge. Your Honor, with all due respect to the prosecution, it's important to clarify that Torres versus Infinity Holdings introduced only a partial modification to the Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steele precedent, not a full repeal. He began walking through the courtroom again, confidence returning. Article 127, paragraph 3 states that partial changes to precedents should only apply to the specific aspects questioned in the new ruling, Lena explained. In Torres versus Infinity, the core issue was how to interpret clauses in hostile takeovers, not friendly mergers like the one we're discussing today. The prosecutor frowned, clearly not expecting that answer. Also, Damien continued, the judge in Torres versus Infinity made it very clear that his decision wasn't meant to apply broadly to all types of mergers, only to those involving coercion or major information imbalance. The judge nodded, following the logic. In our case, we have a friendly merger with full information shared between both sides, documented over 8 months of negotiations. So Torres versus Infinity doesn't apply. The original interpretation from Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steele still stands, valid and relevant. The courtroom fell quiet, broken only by the sound of the judge tapping his pen on the desk. Mr. Hayes, your argument is consistent and well supported. The objection is overruled. 2 hours later, Damien had won the case. The decision was unanimous. Clause 38B was valid, the contract remained in effect, and Hayes and Lee kept not only the $60 million at stake, but also their reputation. Back at the office, everyone was celebrating. But before anything else, Damien went looking for Lena. I need to talk to you. They met in his office, away from the congratulations and toasts happening downstairs. How did you know about Torres versus Infinity? I looked it up last night. When you told me you were nervous, I figured I'd check if any recent cases could cause problems for our strategy. I found 3, including that one. And why didn't you tell me before? Because you were already under pressure, and I knew that if it came up, you'd be able to handle it with the right info in the moment. Damien sat on the edge of his desk. Lena, you saved my career today. You saved your own career. I just whispered a tip. No, it was much more than that. You've been helping me from day one. He stepped closer. I want to make it official. Will you be my personal assistant and lead legal advisor? Full salary, full benefits, and the recognition you deserve? Lena's eyes welled up. Are you serious? Completely. This isn't a favor. This isn't charity. It's respect for your professional value. I accept. They hugged. It was a professional hug, but it lasted a few seconds longer than it needed to. That evening, Damien organized a celebration dinner at Rosewood, one of Chicago's most elegant restaurants. The entire legal team was there, along with several important clients. When Lena arrived, Damien almost didn't recognize her. She wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but understated, and her hair, usually tied back, was loose. She looked beautiful, but still completely herself. During the dinner, she spoke with ease about legal cases, made people laugh with her creative analogies, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with her clothes or shoes. Damien couldn't take his eyes off her all night. The way she gestured while explaining a point, the way she smiled when someone asked a smart question, the way she treated everyone, from the waiter to the top partners, with the same warmth and respect. At the end of the night, as the group began to leave, Damien offered to drive Lena home. You don't need to. I can call an Uber. I insist. After everything you've done for me, it's the least I can do. On the way, they talked about the trial, her new role, and a few last details of the case. The conversation flowed easily, with quiet moments that felt natural, not awkward. When they arrived at Lena's building, Damien turned off the engine. Lena! He turned to her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Something had been building for weeks, an unspoken connection, a quiet pull. Damien leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, uncertain, then deeper. Lena responded, her hands touching his face, lost in the moment. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless. That was a mistake, Damien said, suddenly tense. What? It shouldn't have happened. You work for me now. This complicates everything. That was inappropriate. Lena stayed silent, taking in what he'd said. Damien, it's best if you forget that ever happened, please. She looked at him for a few seconds, then got out of the car without saying anything. Damien watched her go into the building, knowing he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, Damien arrived at the office 2 hours earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well, replaying the moment of the kiss and, most of all, the look on Lena's face when he said it had been a mistake. The way she had looked at him, not angry but with a quiet disappointment that was 1,000 times worse, had haunted him all night. At 9 a.m, when Lena arrived for work, she found a bouquet of white roses on her new desk. A real desk, with drawers and everything, on the administrative floor. It was an elegant, expensive arrangement, the kind that cost more than her previous week's salary. The card attached simply read, I apologize for my inappropriate behavior yesterday. D.H. Lena looked at the flowers for a few seconds, then calmly walked to Damien's office. He was on the phone, but ended the call when he saw her come in carrying the bouquet. Lena, they're very pretty, she said, setting the flowers on his desk. But I'm allergic. Allergic to roses? Allergic to expensive scented apologies. She left a small folded note next to the bouquet and walked out before he could reply. The note read, Next time you want to apologize, try talking. Flowers die in a week. Honest words last forever. Over the next few days, Damien tried to approach her in more subtle ways. He left a coffee from her favorite neighborhood cafe on her desk, a small local place near where she lived, very different from the office's gourmet coffee. Lena thanked him politely, drank it, but made it clear that professional courtesy didn't erase personal discomfort. When he offered to help organize the legal library she had requested for her new office, Lena replied, Thank you, but I'll manage, I always have. There was no hostility in her voice, just a firm setting of boundaries that hadn't existed before that unresolved kiss. On Wednesday, Damien tried a different approach. During a meeting about a new case, he asked for Lena's opinion in front of the entire legal team. Our new advisor certainly has a valuable perspective on this issue, he said, looking directly at her. Lena answered with perfect professionalism, gave precise suggestions, and helped resolve a deadlock that had stalled the discussion for 2 hours. But when the meeting ended and the other lawyers left praising her contribution, she turned to Damien. "Don't use my work to try to fix what broke outside of it. That's not what It is, and you don't need to. My work speaks for itself. It always has. I don't need you to validate me professionally to make up for what happened personally." On Thursday, Damien left a book on her desk, New Precedents in Contract Law, a collection released just the week before. It was exactly the kind of reading he knew she'd love. Lena flipped through it, clearly interested in the content, but returned it at the end of the day with a post-it. "Thanks for the loan. I've already ordered my own copy." On Friday, when Damien tried to start a conversation about a case they were reviewing together, Lena gently interrupted. "Damien, can we set some rules?" "Of course. First, my work stays excellent because I love what I do, not because you need me. Second, our professional partnership is solid and will stay that way. Third, what happened in the parking lot stays in the parking lot. And the fourth rule? Stop trying to make up for what you said with small gestures. If you really believe it was a mistake, then it was. That's it. Let's move on." Damien nodded, but there was something in his eyes that Lena chose not to interpret. Over the weekend, Miguel was playing in the living room when he saw the same black car outside that had dropped his mother off the night before. "Mom, the flower man is down there again." "The flower man?" "The one who sent the white flowers you gave back. The same one who brought you home after the fancy dinner." Lena went to the window. Damien was standing next to the car, looking at the building, but not daring to come up. "Miguel, come here." The boy came over, curious. "This man, is he your friend or your boyfriend?" Lena smiled, brushing her son's hair back. "Why do you want to know?" "Because if he's your friend, you should invite him up. Grandma always says friends are welcome, but if he's your boyfriend..." "If he's my boyfriend, what? Then you have to decide if you really like him or if he's just confused. Because a confused boyfriend makes you sad, and I don't like it when you're sad." Lena hugged her son, amazed by the wisdom of a 6-year-old. "And what do you think he is?" Miguel thought for a few seconds, watching Damien through the window. "I think he's a friend who wanted to be a boyfriend but got scared. Like Pedro in my class, he likes Sophia but pretends he doesn't, because the other boys would laugh at him. You're very smart, you know that?" "Grandma always says that. She also says grown-ups can be sillier than kids sometimes." Lena laughed, still watching Damien down on the street. "You know what? Your grandma's right." Damien stayed out on the sidewalk for another 10 minutes, then got in his car and drove off. Lena stood at the window, thinking about her son's words and about the complex feelings she wasn't quite sure how to name. Miguel, who had gone back to his toys, called from the living room. "Mom, if he comes back tomorrow, can I talk to him? Grown-ups who are confused sometimes need help from kids." Lena shook her head, smiling. Her son was right. Adults often make simple things way too complicated. The next Monday, Damien showed up at Lena's desk with an unexpected proposal. "Want to have lunch outside? I need to talk to you about a case, but away from the office." Lena looked at him, sensing something different in his manner. He seemed less guarded, more human. "What kind of case?" "The kind that can't be solved with case law." They went to a small cafe downtown, far from the upscale restaurants Damien usually went to. It was a simple place, with worn wooden tables and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard. The kind of place where Lena felt at ease. Damien ordered a sandwich he'd barely touched. Lena ate her salad while watching him fidget with a napkin. "So," she said after a few minutes of silence, "what kind of case has you this unsettled?" "I'm the case." She stopped eating and waited. "Lena, I don't know how to handle what I'm feeling." "And what are you feeling?" Damien took a deep breath as if preparing for a courtroom confession. "Ever since you came into my life, everything's changed. The way I work, the way I think, the way I exist. And that scares me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I've never felt this way before. I've never admired someone so much. I've never wanted so badly to be near someone, to hear what they think, to understand how they see the world." Lena set her fork down and gave him her full attention. "Are you confused because you fell in love or because you fell in love with me?" The question caught him off guard. "What's the difference?" "The difference is that maybe you're not used to women who don't need you." Just the real you. Damien frowned. What do you mean? The women you've known before. They needed your status, your money, your influence. I don't need any of that, and that leaves you with no reference point, doesn't it? He sat in silence for a few seconds, taking in her words. Maybe you're right. It's not a maybe. You've spent your whole life being needed by people for the wrong reasons. With me, you're just you, Damien. Not the CEO, not the wealthy guy, just the smart man who asks good questions and sometimes laughs at my bad jokes. Your jokes aren't bad. Yes, they are, but you laugh anyway. They both smiled, and the tension in the air softened a bit. So that's it, Damien said. I'm confused, because you make me feel both unnecessary and essential at the same time. Exactly. You don't have to be anything but yourself, and that terrifies you. It does, because it means if you like me, it's for me, and if you don't, it's also for you. Damien nodded, recognizing the clear, sharp truth in her words. And about the kiss, he said, finally bringing up the thing that had lingered between them. I really believe it was inappropriate. You work for me now, and I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. Lena tilted her head, studying him. Then maybe you should think a little more before going around kissing people. Or did you kiss me out of admiration? No, I kissed you because, in that moment, I couldn't imagine anything more right in the world. And after that, fear took over. Fear of making things complicated, of losing you as a colleague, of, I don't know, not being enough. Lena leaned back in her chair, a soft smile on her lips. Damien, you're many things. Smart, dedicated, sometimes as stubborn as a mule. But not enough? Never. Then why do I feel like I am? Because you're learning how to be with someone who doesn't want anything from you except your company. That is scary. They finished lunch talking about work, but something had shifted between them. There was a new sense of understanding, a kind of honesty that hadn't been there before. When they returned to the office, Damien walked with her to her desk. Lena, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you feel anything for me? She looked at him for a few seconds. I'm sorry, but I'm confused too, and unlike you, I don't have the luxury of kissing someone and calling it a mistake afterward. When you figure out what you really want, let me know. Until then, we're colleagues. Good colleagues. That night at home, Lena was quieter than usual. Miguel was already asleep, and she was helping her mother, Carmen, fold laundry in the living room. You seem different, Carmen said, watching her daughter. Different how? Sad. Not the kind of sad that makes you cry, but the kind that comes from thinking too much. Lena smiled. Her mother always had a way of reading her moods with surgical precision. I'm okay, Mom. Just working through some changes. What kind of changes? Work, personal stuff, a little of everything. Carmen stopped folding clothes and sat next to her daughter. Talk to me. Work is going great, better than I expected. I got the position I always wanted. I'm doing what I love and I'm getting paid well. But my boss is complicated. Complicated how? Lena sighed. He's smart, respectful, he values me professionally, and I feel something for him. And him? Does he feel something for you? I think so, but he keeps going back and forth. He calls his own feelings a mistake. Carmen nodded as if everything suddenly made sense. Oh, I see. He's one of those men who don't know how to handle a strong woman. That's not it, Mom. He admires my strength. The problem is, I think it makes him insecure. And you? How do you feel? Confused. Because I care about him, but I don't know if he really wants me or if he just admires me. And I'm not sure I want to get involved with someone who doesn't even understand his own feelings. Carmen hugged her daughter. Sweetheart, sometimes men take longer to figure out their hearts. Not because they're dumb, but because they're raised to believe that feelings are weakness. So what should I do? You keep being yourself. If he's smart, he'll realize he found something rare. And if not, that's his loss. You've already proven you don't need anyone to be happy. Lena smiled, feeling just a little lighter. Thanks, Mom. You're welcome. And Lena, even if you're feeling unsure, you're glowing. That means something. That night, Lena fell asleep thinking about her mother's words, and about that conversation with Damien. Maybe Carmen was right. Sometimes you just have to be who you are, and let the rest unfold on its own. In the days after that lunch conversation, Damien did exactly what Lena expected. He pulled away. He went back to being the distant, composed CEO, speaking to her with the kind of cold professionalism he'd mastered over the years. In meetings, he referred to her as Ms. Morales. In the hallways, he nodded politely but didn't stop to talk. It was as if the honesty of that lunch had scared him so much that he hid behind the same business armor he'd worn for 15 years. Lena noticed right away and responded the only way she knew how, with dignity. If he wanted distance, she gave him distance. If he preferred formality, she would be perfectly formal. But she also started pulling back from the informal support she'd been giving him. When Damien left documents on her desk with post-its asking for input, she replied by email. Technically sound, detailed, but without the playful comments she used to add. When he tried to start a conversation about a case, she answered clearly and professionally, and got right back to work. The change didn't go unnoticed in the office. Sarah told Robert the vibe between the boss and his new advisor had turned strangely formal. Marcus, still proud of having spotted Lena's talent, noticed she wasn't cracking jokes during her legal explanations anymore. On Thursday, Damien was reviewing a contract when he realized he needed Lena's opinion on a specific clause. Instead of walking over to her desk like he used to, he sent a formal email asking for written feedback. Her reply came 15 minutes later. 3 technically perfect paragraphs, completely impersonal. It was exactly what he'd asked for, but missing the spark he had grown to value in her work. That night, alone at home, Damien found himself searching for Lena on social media. Not something he normally did, but his curiosity got the better of him. Her profile was simple, with just a few photos, but each one told a story. There was a video of Miguel from a few months earlier trying to say the word jurisprudence while Lena laughed in the background. Another showed her explaining a health insurance contract to an elderly neighbor, using cake recipe metaphors. One photo had her sitting in the local library, surrounded by old law books, with Miguel asleep in her lap. It was a world completely different from his own. A place where knowledge was shared freely, where intelligence was used to help, not to compete. A place where she wasn't just respected, but loved. On Saturday, driven by something he couldn't quite name, Damien drove to Lena's neighborhood. He didn't have a specific plan, just an inexplicable need to better understand her world. He stopped in front of a small nonprofit called Hope Community Center. Through the window, he saw Lena sitting at a round table, surrounded by several people. She was gesturing animatedly, explaining something while the others took notes. Damien watched for a few minutes. There was something about Lena's posture there that he had never seen at the office. A natural ease, a genuine joy. She wasn't performing professionalism. She was simply being herself. He took a deep breath and went inside. The group stopped talking when they saw him. Lena looked up, clearly surprised. "Damien, what are you doing here?" "I was driving by and saw you here." A blatant lie, and they both knew it. "This is Damien Hayes," Lena told the group. "My boss." "The famous boss from the legal viral video," said an older woman, smiling. "I'm Mrs. Rosa." Lena was explaining rental contracts to us. Damien greeted everyone politely, but his eyes kept returning to Lena. Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped to a corner of the room. "Seriously, what are you doing here?" Lena asked, but without hostility. "I wanted to understand." "Understand what?" "How you do this. How you are you, all the time." Lena studied him for a few seconds. "Damien, you drove 40 minutes to get here just to ask me that?" "Maybe." "Why?" He looked at the group, who had resumed their discussion, then back at her. "Because this week I went back to being who I've always been, and I realized I don't like that person anymore. And what do you expect me to do about that? Will you let me learn from you?" The question came out sounding more vulnerable than he intended. Lena was silent for a moment, then smiled for the first time in a week. "That depends. Are you willing to listen to Mrs. Rosa explain why her apartment lease is unfair, even if it takes 2 hours?" "I am." "And to help Mr. Carlos understand why the auto shop can't charge him for work he didn't approve?" "I am. And to do it without feeling superior to anyone here?" Damien looked around, seeing for the first time not people needing help, but people with knowledge and experience in things he had never imagined. "I'm willing to try." Lena nodded. "Then have a seat. Mrs. Rosa was just telling us how she figured out on her own that she was entitled to compensation no lawyer wanted to calculate for her. Damien sat down and, for the first time in years, stayed quiet to learn instead of teach. For the next 2 hours, he listened to stories that made him rethink everything he thought he knew about justice, intelligence, and human worth. When they left, Lena asked, "So, did you learn anything?" "I learned that you're not just intelligent, you're wise. And there's a big difference between the two." "What's the difference?" "Intelligence solves problems. Wisdom changes people." For the first time in weeks, they smiled at each other without any walls between them. The following Wednesday, Lena casually mentioned she'd be giving a talk at the community center on consumer rights for everyone. It was part of a project she'd been running for 2 years, teaching basic legal knowledge to people who couldn't afford lawyers. "Can I come?" Damien asked, surprising himself with how natural it sounded. "Won't you find it boring?" "On the contrary, I think I need to see what real advocacy looks like." On Saturday afternoon, the small auditorium at the community center was packed. About 40 people filled the plastic chairs, from young mothers with babies on their laps to retired men with notebooks in hand. Damien sat in the back, watching. Lena walked onto the small improvised stage with a natural ease he'd never seen in the corporate setting. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose, without any of the polished touches that characterized the business presentations he was used to. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began with a genuine smile. "Today we're going to talk about something everyone should know: how not to get tricked when you buy something." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "First, let's agree on something. Everyone here has been tricked at least once. I have, you have, even that well-dressed gentleman in the back," she gestured discreetly toward Damien, "has probably been tricked." More laughter followed, and Damien felt included, not singled out. The difference is, when that happens to someone with money, they hire a lawyer. When it happens to people like us, we get upset, tell our friends, and that's it. We accept the loss. An older woman raised her hand. "But Lena, lawyers are expensive. What are we supposed to do?" "Mrs. Maria, that's exactly what I'm here to talk about today. You don't need a lawyer for everything. What you do need is to know your rights." For the next hour, Lena explained complex concepts using everyday examples. She talked about warranties by comparing them to relationships that don't work out, about abusive interest rates by comparing them to loans between friends, and about misleading contracts using recipes that hide ingredients as a metaphor. Damien watched, fascinated by how she translated legal jargon into plain, relatable language without losing technical accuracy. More importantly, he noticed how people saw her, not as someone superior doing intellectual charity, but as a true ally. When a young man asked how to dispute a wrong charge, Lena didn't just explain the steps. She wrote a sample letter on the board and gave tips on tone and how to build a good argument. "Education is the one kind of power no one can take away from you," she said, as she ended the session. "And knowing your rights is part of that education. Don't let anyone tell you this is too complicated for you to understand. If I could learn while cleaning offices and reading borrowed books, you can too." The audience broke into applause. Several people came up afterward to ask specific questions, thank her, or just talk. Damien watched as Lena gave each person the same attention and respect, no matter how big or small their question was. An elderly woman held Lena's hands and said, "Sweetheart, you're an angel in our lives. Without you, I never would have solved that problem with the phone company." "Mrs. Conceição, you solved it. I just showed you the way." When the crowd finally thinned out, Damien stepped closer. That was incredible. It was just a basic talk. No, it was so much more than that. They walked to the parking lot in silence. Damien seemed deep in thought. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. How do you manage to be to be so important in people's lives without even realizing it?" Lena stopped walking. "Damien, I'm not important. I'm just sharing what I know." "That's exactly it. You don't hold on to knowledge to have power over people. You use knowledge to give people power." He looked at her with a mix of admiration and something close to sadness. "You're everything I wanted to be and never could." "What do you mean?" "I spent my whole life collecting knowledge to stand out, to be better than others. You use yours to lift people up. It's the complete opposite of everything I've built." Lena gently touched his arm. "Damien, It's not too late to change how you use what you know. You think so? I'm sure of it. At that moment, Miguel came running out of the community center, followed by Carmen. Mom, you were amazing, the boy shouted, throwing himself into Lena's arms. Miguel, this is Damien. Damien, my son Miguel, and my mother Carmen. Miguel looked at Damien with curious eyes. You're the guy with the black car, the one who's always confused. Miguel, Lena scolded, embarrassed. Damien laughed. Yeah, that's me, the confused one. Carmen held out her hand with a warm smile. Nice to meet you, Damien. Lena talks a lot about you. I hope it's good things. It is. She says you're very smart, but that you still need to learn how to trust your feelings more. Lena blushed. Mom, what? It's true. Carmen turned to Damien. Can I give you a piece of advice, son? Please. My daughter's not complicated. She just won't accept being treated like a second choice. If you like her, be brave enough to admit it. If you don't, be honest enough to let her move on. Damien nodded, touched by Carmen's gentle honesty. Thank you for the advice, Mrs. Carmen. You're welcome. And now you're both having dinner with us. I made lasagna for an army, and I won't take no for an answer. Miguel grabbed Damien's hand. Do you like lasagna? Grandma makes the best in the world. Damien looked at Lena, who gave a little shrug and a smile. Looks like your evening is all planned out. Looks like it. And for the first time in years, Damien felt truly at home. Dinner at Carmen's had changed everything. Not just for Damien and Lena, but in how they related to each other. In the weeks that followed, they went back to working together as naturally as before. But something had shifted. There was a new sense of honesty between them. Every conversation felt deeper. Every silence carried more meaning. Damien had started going to the community center regularly, not as a guest, but as a volunteer. He discovered that teaching business contracts to small neighborhood entrepreneurs was more fulfilling than closing any multi-million-dollar deal. And Lena watched that transformation with a mix of pride and something she could finally admit to herself. Love. The annual Hayes and Lee event was scheduled for Friday. It was a tradition, an elegant evening where clients, partners, and employees gathered to celebrate the year's achievements. Damien always gave the main speech, a technical summary of the firm's wins and milestones. But this time would be different. That morning, he went looking for Lena. I need you to be there tonight. I always help organize the events. Of course I'll be there. No, I need you there as Lena, not as an employee. She looked at him, puzzled. What are you planning? Something I should have done a long time ago. That evening, the main hall of Hayes and Lee had been transformed. Golden lights, elegant arrangements, soft music. About 200 people mingled, sipping cocktails and chatting. Lena arrived in a simple but elegant black dress she'd bought just for the occasion. She carried a small clutch and a nervous smile. Miguel was at home with Carmen after making his mom promise she'd tell him all about the party the next day. You look beautiful, Damien said when he saw her, and for the first time, she didn't take it as a professional courtesy. You look very sharp, too. He wore a perfect black tux, but there was something different about his posture, less rigid, more human. During the cocktail hour, Lena chatted easily with clients and coworkers. Several recognized her as the viral cleaning lady, and she answered the jokes with humor and grace. Damien watched from a distance, noticing how she turned every interaction into something real. Sarah, the firm's second-in-command, walked up to Lena. Can I confess something? When I heard Damien had promoted you, I was skeptical. I thought it was just a PR move after the video went viral. And now? Now I understand why he says you're the smartest person in the office, and why he's been acting so different. Different how? More human, happier, more himself. When it was time for the speech, Damien stepped up to the small stage at the front of the room. He tapped his glass gently to get everyone's attention. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. The room quieted, expecting the usual talk about numbers and accomplishments. Every year, I come up here to talk about our wins, about the cases we've won, the clients we've gained, the goals we've surpassed, and every year you politely listen as I go through statistics and thank everyone for the team effort. A few soft chuckles rippled through the room. This year is different. Because this year, I learned something that completely changed how I see success. Damien found Lena in the crowd. She stood near the side wall, holding a wine glass she'd barely touched. I learned that intelligence isn't about degrees. Leadership isn't about hierarchy. And value isn't about price. Curious murmurs began to stir. You all know this has been the best year in our firm's history. 68 cases won, 200 million in contracts closed, expansion into 3 new states. Impressive numbers. He paused, eyes still locked on Lena. But none of that happened because I'm some kind of business genius. It happened because I met someone who taught me to see beyond the numbers. Someone who showed me that real law doesn't always happen in boardrooms with city views, but in community centers where everyday people learn about their rights. The room was now completely silent, everyone listening closely. This person taught me that knowledge is only power when it's shared, that intelligence only matters when it lifts others up, and that the greatest success isn't winning a $60 million case, it's helping a 70-year-old woman understand why she doesn't have to pay for a service she never signed up for. Damien stepped off the stage and began walking toward Lena. People stepped aside, creating a path. Lena Morales taught me that intelligence doesn't wear a suit, that wisdom doesn't have a permanent address, and that love can't be bought, bargained, or controlled. Love is recognized, respected, and built every single day. He stopped in front of her. Lena's eyes were filled with tears. She clearly hadn't expected such a public declaration. That's why, in front of all of you, I want to make 2 proposals. Damien turned slightly so he could include the audience, but his eyes stayed on Lena. First proposal. Lena, will you be my official partner? Not just an advisor, but a full partner at Hayes & Lee? With a share of the profits, voting rights on major decisions, and responsibility for the social projects we want to start? The room went completely silent. Lena nodded. 2 moved to speak. Second proposal. And this one is the most important. Will you be my wife? This time, the silence was broken by a few audible sighs from the audience. Lena looked around at all the smiling, expectant faces, then turned back to Damien. Are you sure? Because there's no going back from this. I'm more sure about this than any contract I've ever signed. She smiled, the tears finally falling. I accept both proposals, but I need to set one condition. What is it? No expensive flowers to try to impress me. If you want to give me something special, I want a library. A real library with comfortable chairs and space for Miguel to study. Damien laughed, taking her hands. Deal. A library, chairs, and anything else you want. He kissed her, and this time there was nothing inappropriate or confusing about it. It was the right kiss at the right moment, in front of the right people. The audience burst into applause and cheers. Sarah was crying. Robert was smiling like he'd just won an important case. Marcus was already filming everything for social media. When they pulled apart, Damien whispered in Lena's ear, There's one more thing I want to propose. What is it? I think you should finish law school. Lena pulled back slightly, surprised. Damien, I don't need a diploma to. It's not about needing it. It's about you deserving to have official recognition for what you already know, and because I want you to have every possible option. But what about the time? The work? Miguel? We'll figure it all out. Your mother can help more with Miguel. You can study whenever works best, and if you need to reduce your workload, we'll do it. What matters is that you finish what you started. Lena thought for a few seconds. Law school had been a dream cut short 6 years earlier. The idea of finally earning that degree had always felt too far away to be realistic. Do you really think I should? I think you should do what feels right, but I also think you deserve the choice. And if I agree, do you promise not to rush me or make it easier for me? I promise. You'll earn that degree the same way you've done everything in life, with hard work, intelligence, and determination. Lena smiled. Then I accept. I'll finish law school. Even knowing it will be a lot, working, studying, taking care of Miguel, I've done harder things, and this time, I won't be doing it alone. Damien kissed her again, and for the first time in years, Lena felt that all of her dreams weren't just possible. They were inevitable. The following Monday, she was on the phone with the law school's office, asking about the process to re-enroll. Carmen had immediately offered to help more with Miguel, saying it was time for her daughter to finish what she started properly. And for the first time, Lena realized that having a partner didn't mean depending on someone. It meant building a life together where both their dreams had room to grow. 6 months later, at the same community center where Damien had learned the true meaning of justice, the most unusual wedding Chicago had ever seen was taking place. The decorations didn't come from a fancy magazine. They were made by Carmen's loving hands, who organized a group of neighbors to turn the small auditorium into something magical. Flowers from Mrs. Rose's garden, fabrics borrowed from the local seamstress, lights rigged up by the neighborhood electricians. Every detail was full of history and care. The plastic chairs were decorated with colorful fabric ties. The altar was a simple table covered with a hand-embroidered cloth made by Miguel's grandmother. Instead of an expensive catering service, there was a community table where every family brought a special dish. Damien arrived early, adjusting the simple suit he'd chosen so he wouldn't look out of place. He watched the final preparations with a smile that Sarah, his former employee and now friend, would later describe as like he'd finally found his place in the world. The guests were an unlikely mix. Lawyers from the firm sitting next to cleaning staff, wealthy clients chatting with retired neighbors, law students laughing with kids from the community. Marcus, of course, was recording everything so he could create what he already knew would be the most viral wedding video in American legal history. When the simple music began to play, a playlist Miguel had helped put together, Damien took his place at the makeshift altar. For the first time in years, his hands weren't shaking from nerves. He was exactly where he wanted to be. The door opened, and Lena walked in arm in arm with Miguel. She wore a simple white dress, bought at a neighborhood store and tailored by the local seamstress. Her hair was down with a single fresh flower, a sunflower that Miguel had insisted on, saying, "My mom shines like the sun." Miguel wore a little navy blue suit that made him look like a tiny lawyer. He carried a pillow with the rings, walking with a serious expression that made the whole crowd laugh through their tears. Damien watched Lena walk toward him and finally understood the meaning of the word home. It wasn't a place, it was a person. It was this woman who had changed his entire life with wisdom, humor, and a kind of generosity he was still learning to match. When she reached the altar, Miguel handed the rings to the officiant. Professor Marchesi, the same man who had lent Lena her first legal books years ago. Before the traditional vows, Lena said, catching everyone by surprise, "I'd like to say a few words." She turned to the crowd holding Damien's hands. "For a long time, people knew me as the cleaning lady who knew the law. And that's fine. I really do clean things. But over the years I realized I didn't just clean floors." Her voice was steady, full of quiet emotion. "I cleaned away judgments. My own judgments about what I could or couldn't achieve. Other people's judgments about what it means to be smart, successful, worthy." She looked at Damien. "And I helped someone very special clean away his judgments too, about what it means to lead, to love, and to be truly happy." Carmen was quietly crying in the front row. Mrs. Rosa waved her handkerchief. Sarah and Robert exchanged emotional glances. When it was time to exchange rings, Miguel walked solemnly up to Damien and whispered something that the microphone picked up. "Now you're our assistant too, okay?" The crowd burst out laughing. Damien knelt down to meet him eye to eye. "I accept the job. But can we talk about the salary?" "Sure. But I don't take money. Only ice cream and trips to the park." "Deal." They sealed the agreement with a formal handshake that made everyone laugh again. When they finally kissed as husband and wife, it was under a shower of flower petals brought in by the neighborhood kids. The kiss was long, sweet, and filled with promises that didn't need a contract to be kept. As the party kicked off with music, homemade food, and stories spreading from table to table, Lena and Damien stepped aside for a moment to take it all in. "Any regrets?" he asked, joking. "Marrying you? Never. Doing it in a place where everyone's going to have opinions about our life? Still no." "Why not?" "Because now they're our family, and family looks out for each other." Damien kissed her again, knowing he had found not just a wife, but a whole new way to live. A life where intelligence was measured by how deeply you loved, success was measured by how much you helped others, And happiness was as simple as sharing ice cream with a 6-year-old boy who had just gained a stepfather willing to be his assistant. What did you think of Lena and Damien's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story? Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to keep up with all our stories, and check out more touching stories right here on the final screen.